Hello, friends. This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of June 19th, 2023. And this week we're talking about SiriusXM in a couple of different ways. Now, SiriusXM is a company that you're probably familiar with if you've bought a car that was made sometime in the last decade, because if you bought a new car, it probably came with a free trial of SiriusXM. And if you had bought a used car, well, it probably at least has the antenna on it. And you might have thought about, well, what if I decide that I want to try this? You might have found that a free trial was available if you'd never activated before, and you might have actually tried it. But beyond that, a lot of people don't know about SiriusXM. They don't keep it for a long time. It doesn't necessarily fit their needs because they would rather use Spotify or Apple Music or one of those services. I get that, totally do. And I wanted to kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive on SiriusXM. And first things first, Solid Signal is a SiriusXM dealer. And that is kind of the point of this podcast, is to let you know about the products and services that Solid Signal and Signal Connect offer. So yeah, occasionally we do these kind of ones where it's really just a commercial, and I get that, and I try to make them as entertaining as possible. And hopefully it's something that you're continuing to listen to, because every so often I do totally go off the rails, and those podcasts, which are extremely popular, are the ones that I enjoy doing most too. Now, SiriusXM used to be two different companies. One was called Sirius and one was called XM. You might not have known that because it has been a while. They merged about 15 years ago, and they merged because the two companies, which had been around since just about 2001, weren't really economically viable by themselves. They'd spent a lot of money putting satellites up in the air, and they weren't really able to attract enough customers in order to make it on their own. The merger was approved in 2008, and it took, give or take, 5 to 7 years, actually up to about 10 years, before everything was completely merged and everybody had hardware that would work on everything. It wasn't the easiest of transitions, and I think that in a lot of ways that kind of opened up the opportunity for services like Spotify, for example, to come in and enter the public consciousness, because Spotify had an easier path. As people just got internet on their phones, they had everything they needed, as opposed to something like SiriusXM, where, okay, they had the equipment in a newer car, that's true, but what about at home? Home adoption of SiriusXM has always been a little bit lacking. Totally get that. So I hadn't really thought too much about SiriusXM except in a specific context, and I'll get to that in a minute, in quite some time, until we at Solid Signal started looking at what SiriusXM could do for us. And I discovered, and you might not know this, that SiriusXM has services for boaters, for marine operators, that are far, far beyond what you would get from anybody else. And you know, when you're out there on the water, you may not necessarily have cell service if you're more than 5-10 miles offshore. You may not have all the things that you need to help you with whatever you're trying to do, whether it's good navigation info or fish finding. It really, you are out there on your own. Now, that's the kind of fun part of boating, is the adventure aspect of it, but you don't necessarily want to be completely without the information that you need. And I discovered that SiriusXM offers a lot of those services in a really, really strong package. I should also point out, in addition to the marine services, that if you're interested in keeping or starting SiriusXM in your car, that we can help you with this as well. We are at Solid Signal a full-service SiriusXM dealer, and you might want to take a look at SiriusXM and what it brings to the table. It's different from Spotify because you do get a lot more of a radio-like experience. You get people who are talking, and not just a kind of a podcast, which obviously I have no problem with podcasts, but you get a more radio-like experience. People do like that, and sometimes they like the individuals who are on SiriusXM that you just can't get anywhere else. There's another bit of SiriusXM lore that I want to talk about, and this comes up all the time. I just read another post at another site about this very subject, and people talk about DirecTV and Dish merging, and in the past I have been very negative about the idea of this happening because I don't think that the technical side of both companies is compatible enough. Now that both companies have gotten a little bit better at that, and I think that it's a little bit better time now than it was, but there are still major technical hurdles about that. And so people will say, well, Sirius and XM merged, so DirecTV and Dish should merge. And that's like saying, I like orange juice, but, so I'm definitely going to like cucumber juice. It's not the same thing. Just because they are two similar sounding things, satellite radio, satellite television, doesn't mean that they are the same thing. The challenges that you have merging DirecTV and Dish are totally different from the challenges that Sirius and XM had in merging. And Sirius and XM did have challenges in merging. They did not necessarily have an easy time of it. It cost a lot of money to retrofit a lot of receivers out there. And this was with a relatively small market base. DirecTV and Dish combined still have something close to a 20 million subscriber market base. And keep in mind that most of these subscribers are going to have 2, 3, or 4 receivers. That's a lot of stuff that would get to be refit. And really, when you think about it, that's a lot of opportunity for people to turn the service off. And that's a problem. That's a problem. So I would say, when it comes to DirecTV and Dish merging, I tend to say less these days because there have been some credible reports that there were those negotiations taking place at one point. But at the same time, I would just not use Sirius and XM as an example because it's not a very good example of how this kind of thing could take place. DirecTV's technology and Dish's technology, despite the fact that they kind of act the same, are just totally different. We're talking about not just different satellite dishes, but different encoding used to show the programs, different kinds of copy protection, different policies in use. And it could take a very long time for that to shake out, something that is never really mentioned because people say, oh, well, DirecTV and Dish could merge, and that means that tomorrow I'll get the programs on both services that I like. That's unfortunately not how it works. When having seen these kind of things happen over and over again, it's just not as easy as all that. Anyway, that's about it for the Solid Signal podcast for this week. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It makes me look good to my bosses. Tell your friends about this podcast. It's a lot of fun, and I do occasionally go off the rails. Those are the ones that everybody likes, and it's worth subscribing so that you know when those ones come up. Have a great week, and I will talk to you again next time.